discuss the post-certification requirement. When you have the PMP certification, after 3 years, you need to renew. As I said earlier, you are not renewing by having to write another exam. What you do after 3 years is that you come and show proof that you have been building yourself. In fact, in reality, it's not even after 3 years. Within the 3 years, you need to periodically be going back to PMI to show them that you have been building yourself. So they have a system for this. It's called the PDU, Professional Development Unit. So you're supposed to accrue 60 PDUs over the span of those 3 years for you to be able to renew your PMP certification at the end of the 3 years. So one PDU is roughly equal to 1 hour of learning, of approved learning. So that could be in the form of listening to podcasts, watching videos, relevant videos, taking trainings, relevant trainings anyway, going for chapter meetings, and lots more. Let's discuss the PMP exam. The PMP exam consists of 200 solid questions. Please note that the PMP exam is more of scenario based. They hardly ask what is questions. It is scenario based. So they are testing deep understanding of the principles of project management. So you have 200 solid questions. So solid questions, despite the fact that they are multiple choice, they could still be very, very difficult if you don't prepare well. So out of the 200 questions, you have 25 of them that are called pre-tests. Pre-test in the sense that they are not graded. So technically, you have 175 questions for which you'll be graded in the exam. But the 25 pre-test questions are not, you wouldn't be able to identify them. So it's just as good as saying you have to go and you work towards blasting all the 200 questions that you have. So you have 4 hours to write the exam. So technically, you have like 72 seconds per question. So technically, you have like 72 seconds per question, which is 1 minute. That's 1.2 minutes per question. But that's not how it is in reality. In reality, some questions you'll be able to pick the answer in 1 second or 2 seconds. And some other questions might take as much as 5 minutes. So you have to be aware of time and work appropriately according to the timing and proceed and progress gracefully in the exam. Some questions you'll be able to answer them very fast. Some of them might take some time. So the exam itself, how much does it cost? It depends on whether you're a member of PMI or not. If you're a member of PMI, it costs $405. If you're not a member of PMI, it costs $555. But joining PMI costs $139. So it makes more sense to join PMI. It makes more sense because you also get a lot of benefits by joining PMI. And it's cheaper. 405 plus 139 is still less than 555. So it's okay to join PMI to get the discount and get all the benefits of being a member of that global body of professionals. Let's discuss practice tips when you're writing the exam. When preparing for the exam, it's always advisable for you to practice well. Take sufficient number of mock exams and mock questions and test questions. You should try to be familiar. When you take your mock exams, you should try to do them simulating the full exam, the real exam environment. Time yourself and try to put on that mindset of you actually doing the real exam. Like we said earlier, you have roughly 72 seconds. That is 1 minute and 12 seconds for each question. But the reality, I said earlier, is you wouldn't necessarily need this much for every question. And there'll be some questions that require far more time. So when taking practice tests, focus on the speed at which you complete the questions. On average, you have 72 seconds per question. While there is no additional points for completing more quickly than anyone else, practice fast enough to finish well ahead of time in the exam, because your mind will be accustomed to processing questions at a pace that is above normal. You should try to finish on time so that you can at least go back and review, because you can skip questions in the exam. So when you finish on time, you can go back to the ones that you have skipped. Take the exam tutorial, practice sufficiently well. It's not just enough to read and read and read. You also need to practice and practice and practice. Please avoid overconfidence, especially if you have a lot of years of experience managing project management. It's also important that you understand the PMI way of doing things. It's very key that you understand the PMI way of doing things. And then on the exam day, either you are going to a center or you are doing it in your own environment, your house or your room or wherever. You need to ensure you need to ensure you are comfortable. You need to ensure that there's not much of environmental noise. And if you have noise in the environment, use earphones or earplugs. Just ensure you are comfortable. Just ensure you are comfortable and ensure you have rested well and you're not hungry and all of that. Just ensure you are not distracted either physically or in the mind. Rest well and then you face your exam and blast it by God's grace. Exam tips. Know your formulas well. Very important. As much as the PMP exam is not formula heavy, the very few ones, you should know them very well. Know your terms, know your definitions. You should be familiar with as many scenarios as possible. That is after having solved as much exams as possible. And then you should also know your documents, charter, WBS, tons of all these things. We'll discuss them in the training. Okay, let's discuss some more facts. The PMP exam often uses gray words that are not extreme, maybe generally, such as generally, but can relate to shades of the condition. These gray words could take a bit of time to get used to with sample questions. So, still going back to the fact that you should ensure that you solve sufficient number of questions, tons of questions, before the main exam. The PMP exam can include questions with absolute words such as always, never, completely, or gray words such as sometimes, should, could, general, may. Be sensitive to these words because these things can significantly alter the meaning of a question. The wall. On the exam day, when the exam has started or just before it starts, some of us are not used to sitting down for 4 hours writing an exam. Some people might easily get overwhelmed with having to just think about it that you want to write an exam for 4 hours. How do you fight this? Number one, practice well. Try to simulate the exam day situation as much as possible before the exam. Try to do this several times. And that technique you can use in the exam hall or when you're writing the exam is to mentally break the exam into sections. For example, you could say the first 50, that's one section. The next 50, another section. Another 50, another section, the last 50, then the last section. And as you are working on the section, pretend as though that's the only thing you want to work on the exam. On this exam, 50 questions, and we'll work on 50 questions. And you tell your mind that way. And interestingly, the mind seems to always agree with what you tell it. So it's okay like this to sometimes try to overcome the wall because it could be exhausting. It could be very exhausting. It could be very exhausting. So you pace through the exam very well. You ensure you are not slow. So what kind of questions are you expecting? Interesting questions, scenario-based questions. Like I said earlier, let's use this example. Let's just test waters. So there's a question here saying you are advised that a major purchased part on your project will be delayed. What do you do? Option A is ignore it. It will go away. Option B says notify your boss. Option C says let the customer know about it and talk over options. Option D says meet with the team and identify alternatives. When you are attempting PMP questions, you need to be attentive. You need to pay attention. There are lots of times in which you have more than one seemingly correct option shining, looking at you. So you need to take your time, read the question again, understand what exactly is the question asking me. And beware, there are some questions that will just have so much of wording, that's so much of words, wherein the real thing you need to answer the question might just be one tiny sentence in the midst of all of those things. They are called noise. Sometimes they could add a lot of noise, wherein that are not really necessary for you to understand the question and answer, to be able to answer the question. So in this case now, the question says a major part is delayed. What should you do? Option A, ignore. Obviously, that is not the right thing to do. You're not supposed to ignore. As a project manager, you're not supposed to ignore such things. B says notify your boss. C says let the customer know about it and talk over options. D says meet the team and identify alternatives. The answer here is D. Why? Don't forget the principle of proactivity. The principle of proactivity is what knocks away option B and option C. Option C is also correct, but D is to happen before C can happen. You are not supposed to go and meet your boss to now start ruminating over or brainstorming over a solution to the problem. What you're supposed to do is to have met with your team and thought through these things and come up with options on how to get it solved. Then those are the options you go and present with the sponsor to notify him that, okay, something has happened. We cannot finish the project as earlier planned. The schedule will need to be altered. Kindly let's discuss on what you prefer on our way going forward on this project. And then you meet with the sponsor, you discuss the options you have laid, that you have identified, you agree on something, and then he approves the new schedule.